I was cleaning our apartment while my fiancé Thomas was at work when I found a receipt for a hotel room charged last Tuesday night, the same night he told me he was pulling an all-nighter at office for a critical project deadline. The receipt showed he'd ordered room service for 2 people, including a bottle of champagne I'd never tasted because he claimed to hate the stuff. When he came home that evening, I smiled and asked how his day was, and he looked me straight in the eyes and said he'd been buried in spreadsheets all day. We've been engaged for 11 months, together for 4 years, and suddenly I feel like I'm living with a stranger. I've never been the jealous type. Thomas, 31M, and I, 29F, met at a mutual friend's wedding, where he was a groomsman and I was a bridesmaid. We had that perfect movie moment where our eyes locked across the dance floor. He asked for my number, and things progressed naturally from there. We moved in together after a year, and he proposed 3 years later during a trip to Vermont. We're supposed to get married in 5 months. Our relationship has always been solid. We've had our arguments, sure, but nothing major. Thomas is quiet sometimes, keeps to himself when he's stressed about work, but he's always been honest with me. At least that's what I thought. After finding the receipt, I couldn't think straight. I waited until he fell asleep and checked his phone. I know that's an invasion of privacy, but something felt seriously wrong. His phone was locked with a new passcode. When did he change it? He's always used the same code, the day we met. I couldn't sleep that night. The next day, Thomas left for work as usual, kissing me goodbye like nothing was wrong. I called in sick and spent the day searching our apartment. I found nothing unusual until I checked the pockets of his gym bag. There was a business card for a jewelry store I'd never heard of. Not the one where he bought my engagement ring. When he came home, I casually asked if he wanted to go out for dinner that weekend, mentioning a restaurant near that jewelry store. I don't really like that area, he said, not meeting my eyes. Too crowded. Let's go somewhere closer. I felt sick but nodded and smiled. For the next few days, I pretended everything was normal while my stomach twisted into knots. I started documenting everything, his late nights, his vague explanations, the times his stories didn't quite add up. A week after finding the receipt, I followed him during what was supposed to be his Thursday evening gym session. He drove to a coffee shop across town and met a woman I'd never seen before. She was gorgeous, tall, elegant, probably mid-30s. They hugged for too long when they met, and sat close together, talking intently. I couldn't see their faces clearly, but their body language was intimate. Not necessarily romantic, but definitely familiar. I took photos from my car but couldn't bring myself to confront them. I drove home before Thomas, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. When he came back, he was freshly showered and talked about his intense workout. I nodded and smiled while dying inside. That night, I contacted my best friend Rachel, 30F. She suggested hiring a private investigator, which seemed extreme, but I was desperate for answers. The pie cost more than I could really afford, but I had to know the truth. 3 days later, the pie sent me photos of Thomas meeting the same woman, this time at a park. They were walking side by side, talking animatedly. In one photo, Thomas had his hand on her back, guiding her through a crowd. In another, they were sitting on a bench and she was showing him something on her phone, both of them laughing. I was about to call the whole wedding off when the pie's final report came in. The woman was Elaine Carter, 38F, a custom jewelry designer who specialized in unique engagement and wedding rings. My first thought, Thomas was having an affair and planning to leave me for this woman. My second thought, he was having an affair with her and stupidly buying jewelry from her. My third thought, the one that hurt the most but made the most sense, Thomas was secretly designing a special wedding ring or gift with her. But that didn't explain the hotel room, the champagne, the lies about where he was. I decided to confront him that weekend. I made his favorite dinner and waited. When he came home, before I could say anything, he announced he had to go out of town for work on Monday, just for one night. Another lie. I knew from checking his work calendar on our shared home computer that there was nothing scheduled. That's too bad, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. When will you be back? Tuesday afternoon, he said, pouring himself a glass of wine. That's when I made my decision. I wouldn't confront him yet. I would wait and see where he really went on Monday. I spent the weekend pretending everything was fine while making arrangements with Rachel to follow Thomas on Monday. When he left with his overnight bag, telling me he was heading to the airport for a flight to Chicago, I kissed him goodbye. 20 minutes later, Rachel picked me up, and we followed his car. He didn't go to the airport. He drove to a suburban neighborhood about an hour away and parked in front of a modest house with blue shutters. The woman, Elaine, opened the door and greeted him with a hug. He went inside carrying his overnight bag. I was ready to storm in there, but Rachel held me back. We don't know what's happening yet, she said. Let's wait. So we waited. Hours passed. Thomas didn't leave. Eventually, an older couple arrived, and through the living room window, I could see them all sitting down to dinner together. They looked like a family gathering. I was completely confused. Maybe she's his cousin or something? Rachel suggested. I shook my head. He doesn't have family in this state. He's told me that countless times. As the sky darkened, Rachel and I reluctantly left our stakeout position. I couldn't eat or sleep that night. The next morning, I called the pie again and asked him to find out everything he could about Elaine Carter and the house Thomas had visited. The report came back that afternoon. The house belonged to Eleanor and Richard Carter, both in their 70s. Elaine was their daughter. There was another registered resident at the address, a teenage girl named Sophie Carter, 16 years old. None of this made sense to me. Who were these people to Thomas? And why was he spending the night there? I waited for Thomas to return on Tuesday. When he walked through the door, he started telling me about his meetings in Chicago. I let him talk, nodding and asking appropriate questions while my heart hammered in my chest. Finally, when he finished his elaborate lie, I took a deep breath and said, I know you weren't in Chicago, Thomas. I know you spent the night at Elaine Carter's parents' house. I know about the hotel room last week, and I know you've been meeting with Elaine for weeks. What I don't know is why you're lying to me. The color drained from his face. He sat down heavily on the couch. How did you find out? Does it matter? I asked. Just tell me the truth. Who is she to you? Thomas put his head in his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were filled with tears. She's my sister, he said. I stared at him. You told me you were an only child. I know what I told you, he said quietly. I lied. I've been lying about my family since we met. Why? My voice was barely a whisper. He took a deep breath. Sophie isn't Elaine's daughter. She's mine. This couldn't be happening. You have a daughter? A 16-year-old daughter? Thomas nodded miserably. I was 15 when she was born. Her mother and I were just kids ourselves. We tried to make it work for a while, but she had problems. Addiction issues. When Sophie was 3, her mother left and never came back. I couldn't process what I was hearing. So you raised her? No, Thomas said. I couldn't. I was 18, trying to get into college. My parents refused to help. They'd already disowned me when Sophie was born. It was Elaine who took her in. She was 25 then, had a stable job. She legally adopted Sophie and raised her as her own. Your sister adopted your daughter, I repeated, trying to make sense of it. Yes. And I left. I went to college across the country, started a new life where nobody knew about my past. I told everyone I was an only child. I sent money when I could, but I wasn't there for them. For 16 years? You abandoned your daughter for 16 years? Thomas flinched. I would visit sometimes, but not often enough. Sophie grew up calling Elaine Mom. She knows I'm her biological father, but I'm more like a distant uncle to her. And you never thought to mention any of this to me? The woman you're planning to marry? My voice was rising now, anger replacing shock. I was ashamed, he said simply. When I met you, I thought I could leave that part of my life behind completely. But then, a few months ago, Elaine called me. Sophie was asking questions about her birth mother, going through some teenager stuff. She wanted to know me better. The hotel room? I asked. Sophie had a dance competition in the city. She and Elaine stayed over. I met them for dinner, but the hotel restaurant was too crowded, so we ordered room service. The champagne was for Elaine, her birthday was that week. Everything was starting to make horrible sense. And the jewelry store? Sophie's birthday is next month. I was commissioning a special necklace for her. I wanted it to be perfect. I stood up, needing to put distance between us. Let me get this straight. You've been lying to me for our entire relationship about having a sister and a daughter. You've been sneaking around to see them instead of just introducing me. And you were planning to marry me without ever telling me the truth? I was trying to find the right time to tell you, he said weakly. 4 years wasn't long enough to find the right time? I laughed bitterly. Were you ever going to tell me? Or were you planning to keep your daughter a secret forever? Of course I was going to tell you, he insisted. That's why I've been spending more time with them. I wanted to build a better relationship with Sophie before bringing her into our lives. Our lives? I repeated. There is no or anything right now, Thomas. You've been living a double life. You let me plan a wedding with you while hiding an entire family. They're not my whole family, he said desperately. It's complicated. No, it's not complicated. It's a lie. A massive, fundamental lie about who you are. I grabbed my keys. I need some space. I'm going to Rachel's for a few days. Please, Thomas stood, reaching for me. Let me explain more. Let me make this right. I don't see how you can, I said, pulling away from him. I don't even know who you are anymore. I spent that night crying on Rachel's couch. The next morning, Thomas called repeatedly, but I let everything go to voicemail. I needed time to think. After 3 days at Rachel's, I finally listened to his messages. He sounded genuinely devastated, begging for a chance to introduce me to his family properly, to explain everything face to face. The last message caught my attention. I know I've handled everything wrong, his voice cracked. But Sophie is asking to meet you. She says she wants to know the woman who is going to be her stepmother. Please, if not for me, then for her. That's how, a week after discovering Thomas's secret, I found myself driving to that blue-shuttered house to meet his daughter and the sister who had raised her. Update. Thank you so much for all your comments and support. I honestly didn't expect so many people to respond to my situation. To those who called me an off for checking Thomas's phone, you're probably right, but I'm not sure what else I could have done given the circumstances. To everyone asking if I've broken up with him yet, well, it's complicated. The day I went to meet Sophie and Elaine was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. Thomas wanted to pick me up, but I insisted on driving myself, needing the control. When I arrived at the house, Thomas was waiting outside, looking nervous in a way I'd never seen before. They're excited to meet you, he said as I approached. I didn't respond. I wasn't there for him. Elaine answered the door. In person, the resemblance between her and Thomas was obvious, same warm brown eyes, same smile. She hugged me like we were old friends. I'm so sorry for all the secrecy, she said immediately. I told Thomas months ago that he needed to come clean with you, but it wasn't my place to force the issue. The house was cozy inside, filled with family photos. I noticed immediately that Thomas was in very few of them. There were gaps in the family narrative displayed on those walls, years where he simply wasn't present. Sophie was sitting in the living room, and my heart caught when I saw her. She had Thomas's eyes and chin, but her other features must have come from her birth mother. She was beautiful and looked so young, twisting her hands nervously in her lap. Hi, she said, standing awkwardly. I'm Sophie. I smiled, trying to put her at ease. I'm Natalie. It's really nice to meet you. The first hour was uncomfortable. We sat in the living room making stilted conversation while Thomas watched us anxiously, jumping in to fill any silence. Sophie was reserved but polite, answering my questions about school and her hobbies. She was on her school's debate team and loved photography. Her work was actually quite impressive, based on the framed prints on the walls. Things got easier when Elaine suggested Sophie show me her photo collection. Alone in her bedroom, surrounded by her artwork, Sophie opened up more. Are you mad at my dad? She asked directly, catching me off guard. I considered how to answer honestly without putting her in the middle. I'm upset that he kept you a secret from me for so long. But that's between him and me. It has nothing to do with you. Sophie nodded. He's kept me a secret from everyone for my whole life. It wasn't until this year that he even acknowledged me on social media. She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo Thomas had posted months ago, the two of them at what looked like a casual lunch. The caption read simply, "Great day with this amazing young lady." No indication of their relationship. That must have been hard, I said, feeling a new wave of anger toward Thomas. Elaine, Mom, she's always been there for me. She never lied about who my birth parents were, but she's my real mom in all the ways that matter. Sophie looked at me carefully. Thomas is trying now. He says he wants to be more involved in my life, maybe even have me visit you guys sometimes. Is that something you'd be okay with? The assumption that Thomas and I would still be together hit me hard. I think that would be nice, regardless of what happens between your father and me, I said carefully. Sophie seemed to understand the implication. Oh. So you might break up with him? I honestly don't know yet, I admitted. Finding out about all this so suddenly has been a shock. Sophie was quiet for a moment. He said you were the best person he's ever known. That you made him want to be better. She looked down at her hands. I think that's why he finally started trying with me. After he met you. I didn't know how to respond to that. It didn't excuse his lies, but it did complicate my feelings. We rejoined Thomas and Elaine for dinner, which was less awkward than I expected. Elaine was warm and funny, sharing stories about her jewelry design business, and asking genuine questions about my work as a marketing director. I found myself liking her despite everything. The real surprise came when Eleanor and Richard, Elaine and Thomas's parents, arrived for dessert. They were stiff and formal, especially Richard, who barely acknowledged Thomas. It became clear through dinner conversation that they had essentially cut Thomas off when Sophie was born, considering him a disappointment. They had only recently begun rebuilding a relationship, primarily to be part of Sophie's life. Watching the family dynamics, I began to understand more about why Thomas had created such elaborate lies. He'd been rejected by his parents, had made difficult choices as a teenager that altered the course of his life, and had chosen escape over responsibility. It didn't excuse his deception, but it provided context. As the evening wound down, Thomas asked if he could drive me home. I agreed, needing to talk to him anyway. In the car, he was quiet, waiting for me to speak first. Why didn't you just tell me from the beginning? I finally asked. Did you think I would judge you for having a child so young? Thomas gripped the steering wheel tightly. At first, I just didn't want to talk about it. It was easier to say I was an only child than explain the mess I'd made of my life. And then, as we got more serious, it got harder to come clean. I kept thinking about how to tell you, but there was never a right moment to say, by the way, I have a teenage daughter I abandoned. You should have trusted me, I said. You had so many opportunities. I know, he whispered. When I proposed, I promised myself I'd tell you before the wedding. But I wanted to reconnect with Sophie first, try to be someone she could actually be proud of. Someone you wouldn't be ashamed of. I'm not ashamed of you for having a child young, I said. I'm hurt and angry that you built our relationship on a foundation of lies. Do you understand the difference? He nodded miserably. I do now. Elaine's been telling me the same thing for months. She said you deserve to know that any relationship built on lies would eventually collapse. She was right. I looked out the window, gathering my thoughts. I need more time, Thomas. I can't just forgive this overnight. What can I do? He asked, desperation in his voice. Be honest. Completely honest. No more secrets. And give me space to decide if I can ever trust you again. He dropped me at Rachel's without argument. The next day, he texted asking permission to send me something. When I agreed, a document arrived in my email, a full written account of his history with Sophie, his relationship with his family, everything he kept hidden. It was painful to read but helped fill in the gaps. Over the next 2 weeks, I stayed at Rachel's while considering my options. Thomas respected my request for space, texting only occasionally to check in. Meanwhile, Elaine reached out and invited me to coffee, just the two of us. I'm not here to defend him, she said when we met. What he did was wrong. But I thought you might have questions about Sophie that you didn't want to ask in front of everyone. I did have questions, many of them. Elaine answered everything honestly, including painful details about Sophie's birth mother, who had eventually died of an overdose when Sophie was 7. Thomas was barely functioning himself back then, Elaine explained. He was in college, working 2 jobs, sending what money he could. Our parents had cut him off completely. When Sophie's mother died, he came home for the funeral but couldn't handle it. He went back to school and threw himself into building a career, sending larger checks as he became more successful. Was he ever actually part of Sophie's life? I asked. Elaine sighed. In a limited way. Birthday calls, occasional visits. It wasn't until the last few years that he started visiting more regularly. And only in the past few months has he been trying to build a real relationship with her. Before we parted, Elaine handed me a small package. Sophie asked me to give you this. No pressure on what you decide about Thomas, but she'd like to stay in touch either way. Inside was a handmade photo frame containing a picture Sophie had taken of the sunset over the lake near their house. With it was a note, "It was nice meeting you. Whatever happens, I hope we can know each other better someday." That evening, I finally returned to the apartment Thomas and I shared. He was sitting in the dark and looked up in surprise when I entered. I'm not staying, I said immediately. I just came to get more clothes and talk. Thomas nodded, keeping his distance. I understand. I met with Elaine today, I told him. She filled in some blanks. She's always been the better one of us, he said quietly. I've been thinking a lot about trust and forgiveness, I said, sitting across from him. I don't know if I can trust you again. That's the truth. But I'm willing to try, under certain conditions. The hope that flashed across his face was painful to see. First, I want to postpone the wedding. Indefinitely. We can revisit the idea in a year if things work out. Of course, he agreed immediately. Second, I want us to see a couples therapist. There's too much to work through on our own. He nodded again. Third, I want a real relationship with Sophie, not as her stepmother necessarily, but as someone in her life who cares about her. That stays true even if you and I don't work out. She'd like that, Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. She really liked you. And last, I took a deep breath, I want total honesty from now on. About everything. If I find out you're hiding anything else, we're done. No discussions, no second chances. I swear, Thomas said. No more secrets. I didn't move back in that night, or even that week. But I did agree to have dinner with him and Sophie the following weekend. It was a small step, but it was something. I still don't know if Thomas and I will make it. The breach of trust was enormous, and rebuilding what we had seems almost impossible some days. But then I remember Sophie showing me her photographs, and Elaine's kindness despite the complicated situation, and I wonder if there might be a new version of my life that could include them all. Second update. Thank you for all the supportive messages and advice. So many of you have shared similar stories about discovering partners' secret pasts, and it's been comforting to know I'm not alone in this experience. For those asking if the wedding is completely off, yes, we've officially canceled everything. I've returned my dress and Thomas handled contacting the venue and vendors. It was the right decision, regardless of where things go from here. It's been almost 2 months since I discovered Thomas's secret family, and so much has changed since then. The couple's therapy has been challenging but helpful. Our therapist, Dr. Winters, doesn't let Thomas off the hook for his deception, but she's also helping me understand the complex trauma behind his choices. Apparently, when Thomas got his girlfriend pregnant at 15, his father told him he had destroyed his life and was dead to the family. His mother, while less overtly harsh, did little to counter this narrative. When Sophie was born, Thomas was essentially a child himself, struggling with his parents' rejection and a girlfriend spiraling into addiction. Elaine, 7 years older and already established in her career, stepped in when no one else would. "You were a kid making impossible choices," Dr. Winters told Thomas during one session. "But you're not a kid anymore, and Natalie deserves a partner who can face his past honestly." Thomas has been doing the work. I've moved back into our apartment, but we're sleeping in separate rooms. We're dating again, essentially, having dinners together, talking more openly than we ever have. Sometimes it feels like I'm getting to know him for the first time. The most significant change has been Sophie's presence in our lives. She comes over for dinner weekly now, sometimes with Elaine, sometimes alone. She's guarded but warming up to the situation. Last week, she asked if I would help her with a college essay, and I nearly cried at the simple request. There was a breakthrough moment about 3 weeks ago. Thomas's parents had planned a family dinner and, surprisingly, invited both of us. Throughout the evening, Richard, Thomas's father, made several passive-aggressive comments about Thomas's irresponsibility and poor choices. Sophie sat quietly, looking uncomfortable. Finally, during dessert, I'd had enough. With all due respect, I said to Richard, "I think Thomas made some very difficult choices under impossible circumstances. And from what I can see, Sophie has turned out to be an extraordinary young woman, which is a credit to both Elaine and Thomas." The table went silent. Richard looked shocked that I'd spoken up. Thomas stared at me with something like wonder. "Thank you," Sophie said quietly. "I think so too." After that night, something shifted. Thomas told me later that no one, not even Elaine, had ever defended him to his father before. "I've spent my whole life feeling ashamed around him," he admitted. "Like I could never make up for my mistakes." "Having Sophie wasn't a mistake," I pointed out. "Lying about her was." "I know," he said. "I'm starting to really understand the difference." Last weekend, we had a significant conversation about our future. We were sitting on our small balcony, drinking wine after Sophie had gone home from one of her visits. "I want to be more involved in her college plans," Thomas said. "She's looking at schools on the East Coast. I told her I'd help her visit campuses next month." "That's great," I said sincerely. She seemed excited about Brown. Thomas looked at me intently. "Would you want to come with us? Make it a family trip?" The word family hung between us. "Is that what we're becoming?" I asked. "A family?" "I hope so," he said softly. "I know we have a long way to go, but that's what I want. You, me, Sophie, finding a way forward together." "What about Elaine?" I asked. "She's Sophie's mom in every way that matters." "Of course Elaine too," Thomas said quickly. "I'm not trying to replace her. I think family can be complicated and still work. Different than what I imagined, but maybe better." I took his hand, the first real intimate gesture I'd initiated in months. "I'd like to come on the college trip," I said. "But I'm still taking things one day at a time." Thomas nodded, understanding the boundaries I was maintaining. A few days later, I had coffee with Elaine again, becoming something of a regular occurrence. She's been an unexpected source of support through all of this. "I owe you an apology," she said as we sat down. "I should have pushed Thomas harder to tell you the truth sooner. I knew he was getting serious about you, and I suspected he was keeping us separate." "It wasn't your secret to tell," I assured her. Still, she sighed. "I've spent Sophie's whole life cleaning up after other people's mistakes. First her birth mother's, then my parents', and yes, Thomas's too. I thought I was helping by taking on everything myself, but maybe I made it too easy for everyone to avoid responsibility." "You were amazing," I said firmly. "Sophie is incredible because of you." Elaine smiled sadly. "She is incredible. But she deserves to have her father fully in her life, not just when it's convenient for him. And you deserve the truth from the beginning." I asked the question that had been nagging me. "Do you think he would have ever told me if you hadn't pressured him?" Elaine considered this carefully. "I think he would have, eventually. Thomas isn't a bad person. He's someone who made bad choices when he was very young, and then couldn't figure out how to unmake them as he got older. The lies compounded." She looked at me directly. "But he loves you in a way I've never seen him love anyone. You made him want to be better. That's why he started coming around more, trying harder with Sophie. He wanted to be the man you thought he was." I didn't know if that was enough to rebuild what we'd lost, but it was something to consider. Then last week, something unexpected happened. I received an email from a woman named Julia Chen, who identified herself as Sophie's maternal aunt, her birth mother's sister. She had recently found Sophie on Instagram and discovered through photos that Sophie was in contact with Thomas again. Julia was planning to visit our city and wanted to meet Sophie, hoping I could help facilitate a connection. I was stunned. Another piece of Sophie's history, another family tie emerging from the shadows. I forwarded the email to Thomas and Elaine, unsure how to respond. Thomas called me immediately, sounding panicked. Carolyn's family never wanted anything to do with Sophie after she died. Why are they reaching out now? Maybe Julia just wants to know her niece, I suggested. People change, circumstances change. I need to protect Sophie, Thomas insisted. We don't know what this woman wants. It was the first time I'd heard him take such a paternal stance regarding Sophie. In therapy, he'd admitted that he'd always deferred to Elaine on parenting decisions, seeing himself more as a distant provider than a father. Sophie's 16, I reminded him gently. Old enough to decide if she wants to meet her aunt. But we should talk to Elaine first. The three of us met that evening to discuss the situation. Elaine was cautious but not opposed to the meeting. Sophie has been asking more questions about her birth mother lately, she acknowledged. Having a connection to that side of her family might be good for her. Or it could open old wounds, Thomas argued. Carolyn's addiction destroyed everyone around her. What if Julia is just like her? We don't know that, I pointed out. And keeping secrets hasn't worked out well for any of us so far. Thomas looked chastened by this. You're right, he admitted. I'm just scared. I don't want Sophie to get hurt. That's called being a parent, Elaine said with a small smile. Always being terrified they'll get hurt, but knowing you have to let them make their own connections anyway. We decided to present the option to Sophie, with all of us there for support. To my surprise, Sophie immediately wanted to meet her aunt. I don't remember much about my birth mom, she explained. Just fragments. It would be nice to know more about where I came from. Thomas looked pained but nodded. Whatever you want, Sophie. We'll be there with you. All of us? Sophie asked, looking at me. If you want me there, I said, touched by the inclusion. She nodded. You're good at talking to people. And you're not all tangled up in the history like they are. She gestured at Thomas and Elaine. The meeting with Julia is scheduled for next weekend. I'm nervous about it, not knowing what new complications might arise from this connection to Sophie's maternal family. But I'm also hopeful that it represents another step toward honesty and healing for everyone involved. As for Thomas and me, we're in a strange limbo. Not back to where we were before, I don't think we'll ever be those people again. But maybe moving towards something new, something built on a more honest foundation. Some days I still feel the sharp sting of betrayal when I think about how easily and thoroughly he lied to me. Other days, I see him with Sophie, awkwardly but earnestly trying to be the father she deserves, and I glimpse the man I might be able to trust again someday. Rachel thinks I'm crazy for not walking away completely. Once a liar, always a liar, she insists. But I don't think it's that simple. People are complicated, and families even more so. I'm learning that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing, but it might mean understanding and choosing to move forward anyway. I don't know if Thomas and I will ever make it back to where we were planning a future together. But I do know that Sophie, Elaine, and yes, even Thomas, have become important parts of my life that I'm not ready to let go of just yet. Final update. Thank you all for your continued support and for sharing your own stories of family complications and reconciliation. Your messages have meant more than you know during this difficult time. Some of you have asked if I've lost myself in trying to fix Thomas's broken family. That's a fair question, and one I've asked myself frequently over these past few months. It's been 5 months since I discovered Thomas's secret daughter and sister. Almost half a year of therapy, difficult conversations, and rebuilding what felt irreparably broken. The meeting with Julia, Sophie's maternal aunt, went better than any of us expected. She was kind, stable, and genuinely interested in knowing her niece. She brought photos of Sophie's birth mother, Carolyn, from before her addiction took hold, Sophie at school concerts, family holidays, ordinary moments that filled gaps in Sophie's understanding of where she came from. She loved you, Julia told Sophie. Even when she couldn't take care of you, she loved you. That never changed. I watched Thomas during this conversation, saw the complex emotions crossing his face. Later, he confessed to me that he'd spent years demonizing Carolyn in his mind, making her the villain in their story to lessen his own guilt about walking away. She was sick, he said quietly. And I was too young and scared to handle it. We both failed Sophie in different ways. That night, Thomas showed me a box he'd kept hidden in his office closet. Inside were birthday cards he'd bought for Sophie over the years but never sent, school photos Elaine had mailed him, child support checks with dates tracking his increasing income as Sophie grew. Evidence of his distant, inadequate connection to his daughter, preserved like artifacts of shame. I told myself I was protecting her by staying away, he said, his voice breaking. But I was really protecting myself from facing what I'd done. 2 weeks after meeting Julia, Thomas asked if I would accompany him to a family therapy session with Sophie and Elaine. I'm trying to make things right, he said. We need to talk about everything openly, with professional help. I agreed, and that session became a turning point for all of us. The therapist, Dr. Kelsey, had worked with blended families for years and didn't flinch at our complicated situation. Families come in all forms, she told us. What matters is honest communication and clear boundaries. During the session, Sophie finally expressed her hurt over Thomas's absence in her life. I used to make up stories about why you weren't around, she admitted. I told my friends you were in the military, or working on top secret projects overseas, anything that sounded better than he just didn't want to be my dad. Thomas couldn't speak through his tears. Elaine reached for his hand, an unexpected gesture of forgiveness that left me stunned. We all did the best we could with an impossible situation, Elaine said. Sophie was always loved and cared for. That's what matters most. But she deserved better from me, Thomas finally managed. You all did. After the session, Sophie asked if she could visit our apartment more often. I'd like to know where my dad lives, she said simply. What his life is really like. Thomas's expression in that moment, the overwhelming joy and relief, showed me a side of him I'd never seen before. The next month was a blur of activity. We helped Sophie research colleges, with Thomas setting up a proper college fund that he should have established years ago. Julia visited again, bringing more family photos and stories. Elaine and I started collaborating on ideas for Sophie's graduation party next year. Thomas's parents even began making tentative efforts to be more involved, though Richard remained stiff and judgmental. Throughout it all, Thomas and I continued our separate therapy sessions and our couples counseling. Some days were better than others. I still had moments of doubt, still wondered if I could ever fully trust him again. You're allowed to walk away, Dr. Winters reminded me during one session. Staying would be a choice, not an obligation. I know, I said. But I'm not ready to make that choice yet, either way. A significant moment came when Sophie's school held a father-daughter dance. She casually mentioned it to Thomas during dinner one night, saying she'd never attended before. Would you want to go? Thomas asked hesitantly. With me? Sophie shrugged with teenage nonchalance, but I could see the hope in her eyes. Maybe. If you want to. The night of the dance, I helped Thomas pick out a tie that matched Sophie's dress. He was nearly sick with nerves, afraid of embarrassing her, afraid of not measuring up to the other fathers who'd been present throughout their daughters' lives. Just be yourself, I advised him. That's who she wants to know. When Sophie arrived with Elaine, she looked beautiful and suddenly so grown up. Thomas's hands shook as he pinned on her corsage. As they left for the dance, Elaine turned to me with tears in her eyes. Thank you, she said. For making this possible. I didn't do anything, I protested. You could have walked away when you found out the truth. Most people would have. Instead, you helped bring this family together. I was surprised by her words. Had I done that? Or had I just been trying to figure out my own path forward? Later that night, Thomas sent me a photo of him and Sophie dancing, both smiling awkwardly but genuinely. My heart squeezed seeing them together, finally building the relationship they should have had all along. When they returned from the dance, Sophie surprised me with a hug before leaving with Elaine. Thanks for fixing my dad, she whispered. Those words haunted me for days afterward. I hadn't fixed Thomas. I wasn't sure anyone could. And I wasn't sure it was my responsibility to try. The breaking point came unexpectedly. Thomas and I were having dinner with Rachel and her new boyfriend when she innocently asked about our rescheduled wedding plans. We haven't decided yet, I said quickly, changing the subject. On the drive home, Thomas was quiet. When we arrived at our apartment, he finally spoke. You don't want to marry me anymore, do you? I couldn't answer immediately, which was an answer in itself. Thomas sat heavily on the couch. I keep waiting for you to forgive me completely, but you haven't. And maybe you shouldn't. It's not about forgiveness, I said carefully. It's about trust. I care about you, Thomas. I care about Sophie and Elaine and this whole complicated family we've created. But I don't know if I can ever trust you enough to marry you. Because I lied. Because you sustained that lie for 4 years, I corrected gently. Because you were planning to marry me without ever telling me the truth. That's not something I can just get over because we're in therapy or because you're trying to be a better father now. Thomas nodded, tears streaming down his face. I understand. I really do. He took a deep breath. Maybe we should acknowledge that our relationship has fundamentally changed. Maybe we need to accept that we can't go back to what we were planning. It was the first time either of us had openly acknowledged what we'd both been feeling. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. I think you're right, I said. I think we need to let go of what we thought our future would be. The next few days were filled with difficult conversations about practical matters. We owned our apartment together. We had joint accounts. We planned an entire life that now needed to be dismantled. But strangely, as we worked through these logistics, a weight lifted from both of us. We were no longer pretending, no longer trying to force our relationship back into its former shape. I don't want to lose you completely, Thomas admitted as we divided our possessions. I don't know what that looks like, but Sophie cares about you. And frankly, so do I. I cared about them too, more than I'd expected to after everything that had happened. The idea of completely cutting ties with Sophie and Elaine felt wrong. That's how we arrived at our current arrangement. I moved into my own apartment across town. Thomas and I are no longer a couple, but we're cautiously building a friendship based on honesty this time. We still attend family therapy with Sophie and Elaine, working toward healthy boundaries and clear communication. I still help Sophie with her college applications and photography projects. Thomas is still actively working to be a better father and brother. Last week, Sophie was accepted to her top choice college with a significant scholarship. We all celebrated together at Elaine's house, along with Julia and even Thomas's parents. It wasn't perfect, Richard still made a few tone-deaf comments, and there were moments of awkwardness. But it was real, and there were no lies or secrets hanging over us. As I drove home that night, I realized something important. I wasn't diminished by the collapse of my relationship with Thomas. I was expanded by the connections I'd made with Sophie and Elaine, by the hard work of reconciliation I'd witnessed and participated in. I had helped a fractured family begin to heal, even as my own expected future had fallen apart. Thomas texted me later that evening, "Thank you for being there tonight. It meant everything to Sophie. And to me." I texted back, "I wouldn't have missed it. I'm proud of all of us." And I meant it. I'm proud of us, not for maintaining a romantic relationship that couldn't survive the breach of trust, but for finding a way forward that honors the complicated connections we formed. I don't know what the future holds. I'm dating again, cautiously. Thomas is focused on being a father to Sophie and repairing his relationship with his parents. We're not the family I thought we would become, but we're something authentic and honest. So, Ida for investigating my fiancé and discovering his secret? Maybe. But I think we've all emerged stronger from the painful truths that followed. And sometimes, that's the best outcome you can hope for when the life you planned falls apart.